Hi, I'm Daniela. In today's video, I'm going to respond to the Ask Me Anything questions that some of you were so generous to provide. These questions involve different art techniques, as well as some personal questions about my life in general. I hope this video helps you to get to know me a little bit better. So let's get started. The first question from Karina asks about inspiration. How do you get inspiration to start on a new project? Do you picture it as a painting or a sewing first? How do you manage to choose when you have lots of ideas for projects, but you don't know where to start? Well, I have lots of ideas always. So I kind of start whatever really strikes me the most. It's a very basic, simple way that I do it. Now, if I have a deadline, I'll do everything I can to meet that deadline. But given the option that I have to create my curriculum, I'll choose things that really speak to me. And I usually choose a group of things, not always related. In fact, they're better if they're not related. And this way I can dabble. I can do a little bit of sewing, a little painting, and some cooking, whatever really strikes my fancy where I really feel inspired. Another thing that I do that helps me stay on track, stay focused, and keep track of my ideas is I have lots of notebooks and lists. I have a note on my computer. I have a note on my cell phone, which is probably my most valuable tool overall because I always have it with me. It has a camera and it has lists. So sometimes I can just add to my lists. I have a little note program. Other times I'll just snap a photo. So in my photos, in addition to photos of family and things that are important to me, I have really unusual photos. Things that inspire me. Either I want to paint or I thought, I could make that out of textile. So that's what I do to keep track of things. I also have a little notepad in the bathroom, so in the shower, if I have an idea, I can quickly jot it down because I tend to forget things very quickly. And my notepad in the shower is quite waterlogged, but that's okay. It does its job. I keep a little notebook by the bed so that if I wake up in the middle of the night to write down an idea, I don't have to turn on my phone and light up the room and wake my husband to record the idea. So I just keep a notepad and a pen. And again, I'm not going for perfection with that notepad. My notes are not even on the lines, and sometimes they don't even follow the portrait formation of a book. I'll just write them sideways, upside down, on the back cover, wherever I can make the note and still go back to sleep, because I really prioritize sleep as much as I can. To the second part of that question, do I picture it as a painting or sewing first? Well, depends. I really can't answer that. Some things I definitely sketch out or I'll paint out. Other things I'll just jump right in for sewing. So it really depends on the particular item. A lot of times if I'm completely unfamiliar with the item, I'll just sew it first. And if it doesn't go so well, back to the drawing board and I'll sketch it out and go from there. So really, it depends. I kind of trust my instinct. It's something that isn't always right, but I can always back it up. And if it isn't right, I can usually figure out why it wasn't correct. And I'll learn from those choices. But I really feel like trusting your instinct is the way to go. And this hones and develops your creativity and your ability to see things that you want to use as your spark, as your inspiration. Michael asks, how did you get started on your creative journey? What skills, crafts, techniques did you learn first? And did you study art formally? Well, I did not study art formally. My degree is in education. I love to teach, whether it's teaching cooking. When my father had the restaurant, I would teach different staff, different techniques. Or when I was teaching karate, or all these things. I just love to teach. I love to see that excitement in somebody when they master a technique. Now, I have taken many art classes, both online, but even long before the online era, took classes in person. And I love the watercolor, I love the painting. It was just a real thrill for me. I took some sculpture classes. I really enjoyed it. I don't have a degree, but I do have lots of experience in different things. And the one thing that I learned growing up was just to try things. It's okay if you fail. In fact, it's sometimes better. That lesson was a hard one to learn, but I eventually learned it. Now, the first things that I learned to do were write and draw. I think most kids do that, but I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed writing in school. I joined the school newspaper. I love to do things along those lines. As I grew up, I started honing my craft without even realizing it. My father opened a restaurant and we all worked there, all my siblings and the family. It was a family restaurant. And when something needed to be done, we had to learn how to do it. Somebody did, or a group of us. So I learned how to decorate wedding cakes. I learned to use marzipan and buttercream, and that was self-taught. At that time, I had to go to the library to check out books, practice my technique. Lots of practice, lots of failed flowers, lots of inconsistent frosting, but I eventually got the hang of it. From there, a few years later, I started to take cake decorating classes, and that was very valuable to me. And that's a skill I've had to this day, where I have some friends that I make their cake every year for, and it really brings me a lot of joy, and it brings them a lot of joy. So I learned a lot of my techniques out of necessity, and I think that's where a lot of people do. There was really no option to fail. I had to keep going to make these things work. So if I was designing an element for a menu, I had to keep doing it until I got it right. And a lot of times I was under a time crunch to do that. So that was a really good experience for me, learning to appreciate my time and really jump in wholehearted and give something my effort, my entire effort. Elizabeth asks if I ever embellish hand-painted designs on fabric with slow stitching. Well, I do. So far, I have a few techniques. I'm still working on them before I present a video. I like to try and figure out the best way to present it so that it's not intimidating and it's very open-ended so people can modify the technique to suit their own. But I'd be really happy to show you some of my examples. Here I have a picture of just a simple painting, and then here's the result when it's painted. And then I have a few others to show you as well. As you can see, the stitches just really enhance what's already there. It's a fun way to add depth to your slow stitching pieces as well as your paintings. Cathy asks, what's the best way to bind a book to avoid the crocodile mouth? And this took a little bit of back and forth for me to really understand what she meant, but I think I do. It's when you bind the book and it pulls so that the book is kind of open. So the way to do that, and I showed this in one of the videos, but probably not specifically enough, is to make sure that your cover is long enough and that when you sew it together, you have a gap. So it doesn't look quite right until you finish sewing it, and then you can see that it holds the book together quite nicely. I'll link that video below, but I'll also show the technique here. So the crocodile mouth, if I'm correct in assuming it, it just means that the cover is bound so that it kind of forces the book open. I'm kind of giving an example here. If I pull it to the side, hence the mouth of a crocodile. So the way to alleviate this when you're binding this type of book is to make sure your cover is longer than you'd expect. So for example, if these are the pages of my book, these are just unbound pages without a cover, technically, you can take a piece of fabric that's the proper height and wrap it around your cover. Now, this is an exaggeration just to show you, but even if I sewed it to the edge here, it kind of pulls the book open. So instead, you want to have a cover. Now, notice how much longer this one is, that when you put your book down and you go to bind it, you don't wrap it around tightly. You have a little gap over here. So you want to make sure that you attach it based on the ends of your book. And you stitch here, and then on this side, you'll stitch at the ends of your book all the way around, and this spine will be open. And when that spine is open, that prevents that pulling on the book, and it covers the book nicely. Because you have that give, you can open the book flat, or you can move it around. So I hope this is helpful, Cathy. Cheryl asks, how do you feel about mixed media journal artists coming to the Stitch With Me 2023 videos and workshop? I love it. I think it's fantastic when anybody can take your idea and do something with it. Whether they do it with mixed media art, paper, woodworking, glass, any technique, I'm really flattered by that somebody would be inspired by an idea or a theme or a technique that they saw me use, and then they would bring it and make it their own. As a teacher, I find that the highest form of flattery, and it really makes my day. So I know some teachers are very specific. When they give a prompt, they want you to use that prompt and only that prompt in a specific way. And that does hone certain skills. But I'm not that teacher. I think people should take the techniques and do this and make it their own. And that brings me the most joy. Isabelle asks about printed lettering on your slow stitching. She says that she sees a lot of designs with people stitching these beautiful hand lettering, and I agree with her. She wants to know if there's any specific stamping apparatus to use for that. Well, I do have a video where I stamped a Christmas saying, and I used that and traced that to use my text, and I'll link that below. I personally like to write with a pen and use my handwriting for the guide, but I can see where stamping it would be beneficial. You can use just letter stamps, any particular set, but then you're required to use that size. So if they're a 1/2 inch or an inch, you have a set that you can only use for that 1/2 inch or that inch size. But perhaps one of you viewers has an answer to this question that would be helpful, or a set in particular that you find most useful. If you do, please comment below so you could help us all out with the answer. And I'll end the video with this question. Karina asked what other crafty things I do and what are some interests I have. Well, I love to work with my hands. So at different times of my life, I've done different things. I have worked with glass fusing, which I really loved. I made some beautiful plates and platters, and the idea of working with something shiny like glass was very exciting, and it was completely new to me. I had a very good friend that we took the class together and learned how to do it, and then we'd make it a weekly date to get to the studio and work on our glass together, and I have very fond memories of that. In the winters, I would knit. I would knit scarves for family, friends of my kids. We used to live in New England. It was always cold, and a scarf would always come in handy. And I can remember spending my winters, basically the end of September through Christmas time, knitting like a fiend. My husband recalls hearing the little knitting needles hitting each other on the couch. So I enjoy working with different types of fabric and yarn as well. I made costumes for my kids' plays when they were at school. One year they did a Shakespeare play and they needed 20 costumes. And so I love to do stuff like that. I set up a machine in the basement and I just worked. So that brought me a lot of joy as well. Now physically, I really like to exercise. And to me, it's not even exercise, the dreaded exercise. I love to perspire and sweat and move around. So I do a lot of work walking. I play tennis. I go bowling. I used to ski. I go swimming. Anytime I can move my body, I feel terrific. I also like to do workouts with weights. This is just something that's brought me joy for many years. And through different stages of my life, I was more fit than others, but I've always worked out with either the TRX system or just some free weights and floor exercises. So I've really enjoyed that aspect as well. I know that if I sit still for too long, I tend to get antsy and I start to do laps around the house. So I want to thank you for your questions. If anyone has additional questions, I can do another Ask Me Anything video in the future. I hope this video helped you to get to know me a little bit better. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe. Thanks for joining me today.